Awesome. Thank you, Josh. New legend of Indiana. New legend is my very own hashtag I made up for Josh and a bunch of folks that used to play down at the Brown Hotel. They were the new legends. It was an incredible period down there at the Brown Hotel. Welcome back. My name's Gerald. This is Center Webcast COVID-19 edition. This is episode 6. I'm excited to be joined now by Chief Justin Shawl as the Chief of Police for Indiana Borough. How are you doing? Welcome, Chief Shawl.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks so much for coming. So I want to go right into a little bit of some of your duties and how you've been involved as Chief of Police in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. I should say up front, being on a borough council, I'm aware of a lot of the things that you're doing, and I do appreciate it. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the borough and the police have changed operations over the last couple weeks in order to serve the community through this pandemic.
Well, I'll tell you, I appreciate this opportunity very much, and goodness, how things have changed for us all really in such a short amount of time. Days feel like minutes, and things are happening so quickly. But just a few weeks ago, we were trying to prepare best for a celebratory weekend, IU Patties, and around that time, quickly things turned to this crisis and this pandemic, and so planning was not so much in the world of law enforcement to come together for prevention of gatherings that would be disruptive. Rather, it was how do we best all stay apart from each other to be responsible with social distancing, and how do we model the behavior that is being recommended by the CDC and by the Department of Health, and where is the police mission in this time of crisis for everybody? And I got some very good advice very early on that said, really there's not too much you couldn't do too much in this time period, and so act as quickly as possible. So really I've considered my leadership journey with the police department to be how quickly can we position Indiana Borough to best succeed for its residents and visitors and businesses. So majority of my time these days is spent on how can we keep the workforce productive and safe and being there for our community, and how can we support the community, and how can we be proactive in preventing stress and anxiety that are going to lead to the dangers that we present or that society presents. So it's been a very unique moment. It's affected everyone. To echo the sentiment of everyone else that's been on this program today, we're all in this together, and we recognize clearly that everybody's hurting. And it's a very difficult position to be in, to see so many folks in a position of disadvantage by no fault of anyone's. But this is where we are, and we're all here for a purpose. And we're here in 2020 navigating this moment in time for that purpose. And so I'm just trying to be a good steward of everything that's been entrusted and given. And I may have just as many questions as everyone else does. Certainly I have no solid answers more than anyone else does. But it's been a transition for the police department, and everyone wants to best help and to best protect. And we're trying now to protect against something that we can't see. As Tony said in his earlier interview, that the concern is something that we can't see and that we don't know where it is necessarily, except that it's generally all around us. So the best thing that I can think to do is for us to be as responsible as possible with the lives that we're entrusted to protect. And in some ways, in a very different fashion, that means staying away from each other as much as possible, as opposed to coming together for things that aren't life-saving.
So I appreciate that. Let me ask you about some of the kind of the gatherings, or the CDC and the governor is recommending really no gatherings whatsoever. And I think on one of the last public meetings, I think you were quoted. You said there were no responsible gatherings this weekend. In particular, it was related to preparations for IU Patties. And I'm wondering, have you seen much, challenge to that idea that there really shouldn't be any parties happening, whether they're sanctioned or unsanctioned? And have you, as a police force, have you has there been a need to enforce some of the closures in terms of, or closures or reduction in gatherings? Has the police force needed to enforce many of these things?
So on March 17th, Borough Council and Mayor Hood enacted a emergency declaration or proclamation that reduced gatherings on public property to gatherings under 5. And shortly thereafter, the governor further restricted gatherings to the point that we're at now, which is a stay-at-home order. So with some business closures that occurred, I can say this, that Indiana Borough business has been extremely receptive and extremely responsible and professional with their response. So we've had no enforcement issues. We've had some conversations with business owners. Our purpose is to be a good partner with business owners, not to be punitive in anything that we do, but rather to be educational. We've learned a lot in that period as to what some businesses are capable of and what some businesses are doing that may not be just simply what you would think from looking in the window, which has been very productive. We've gotten no hardline stance of any business in Indiana Borough not being a good steward. So in that regard, it's been very pleasant because our mission is to walk alongside, not to be punitive in that regard. With the stay-at-home order, this has just recently reached Indiana Borough and Indiana County. It was more regional and now it's statewide. So the stay-at-home order, really, we're trying to take that same approach, which is educating and not being punitive in our first approach. I would tell you that the police department is seeing, as the weather gets nicer, some gatherings that are certainly wouldn't be responsible because they're occurring with more than not as socially distanced as they should be. Now the enforcement of that becomes not problematic, but the enforcement of that becomes important, and that we're trying to educate as opposed to be punitive. But there will reach a point in time where I think if there are folks that are interested in gathering irresponsibly, and every gathering is irresponsible under the stay-at-home order, that we will have to take more of a stringent approach to that. So our best goal up front is to try and continue to educate and appeal to best senses and sensibilities. Folks are not being disrespectful, but I don't know that everyone grasps the significance of the moment that we're in and the opportunity that we have to be truly protective of each other, which is where I believe the police department needs to focus its time, which is on being respectful to community need and supportive and available in emergency. So to circle back to some of the things that we're doing, they're less proactive and more reactive, but that's strategic as opposed to anything else, because if we can't remain accessible, we're not serving anyone. And I would not want any member of your police department and everyone's police department to be involved in the unwitting spread of COVID-19 to our community with some type of action that wasn't absolutely imperative at the moment.
So there's been some news in the area about burglaries in the area, and there was some, at least in my world, relatively high-profile burglary of one of our guests here. Can you talk about levels of a crime, or we also talked about domestic violence being on the increase. Can you talk about, have you seen a rise in any particular kinds of crimes, or are there anything in particular that you've seen on the increase or decrease?
So the calls that we are documenting have not significantly increased or significantly decreased. Specific to domestic violence, and I know that this is a very important topic, and incidents of domestic violence, I have no doubt, are occurring. They're likely occurring in a more hidden manner today than they were before. The Indiana Borough Police Department is not seeing an increase in the number of reports of domestic violence. What we have seen since the pandemic has hit the national airways more and in a more real way, we've seen incidents of violence in the domestic situations that we are handling at an increase, and I don't know that that's going to continue or decline. I don't know if that was specifically attributed to the stress of the moment, but it happened at the same time, so it's something worthy of us taking note of and being cautious in regards to. But the number of domestic violence incidents are not rising in Indiana Borough as of today. I have no evidence to suggest that. I can say from a personal standpoint that stress is rising, and that's something that we all need to be protective of, is the level of stress that we're all feeling, because as stress and anxiety increases, the likelihood to make a decision that we wouldn't normally make is increased. And we know around the holidays in law enforcement, when there's times are stressful and we're all around family, the incidents of domestic violence do increase. So we very much want to keep a stress level low for the community as best we can. And you showed a screenshot earlier of a message that was issued to the community. Very much so, I consider an important role of the police to try to decrease that community stress level. And I think we do that by keeping in contact with each other. This show is an excellent example of that. It's an extremely valuable resource, because the idea is to separate, not to isolate. So I'm really fearful that we have population that may be isolated and not separated. And we need to reach everyone. So we're taking to social media to do that a little differently with the Borough Police Department. Maybe the topic of conversation might be a little different than everyone is used to, where it might appear that there's a picture or something that appears. But, these are just things to keep us connected. And really, we're here. We're here 24 hours. Our mission is to serve in any way that we can, and that does not have to be in a very specific sense. It can be much more general than that.
I appreciate that. I have one more question. We had some feedback in terms of the press releases were put out. Just on the Facebook Live, I just heard from Brandon that there was some comments that they really appreciated the extra, I guess I'll call them press releases, the extra statements that the Borough Police has put out in terms of exactly that, trying to do that communication to try to relieve the community stress and anxiety. I think that idea that more communication is better is really key, and I think that's a good role. So there's been quite a lot of good feedback on those efforts.
Well, I appreciate that. I really hope that it does serve to just have folks understand and everyone that we're all here. We're all here together, and I wouldn't want to make it seem like we have isolated ourselves, because in the converse, we recognize that we have to all be together in separation, but separation's physical, and that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with us keeping in touch with each other.
Great. I have two more sort of technical questions. One is about criminal activity, and whereas there are businesses that are shuttered right now that are not usually, should business owners be worried about that? Should they be going in to check on those businesses frequently? Is that something that your officers are aware of and are patrolling?
Well, I can say this emphatically, that we have drastically increased our business security checks in the community, as well as our property owners who have properties that are not inhabited. We're very much guarded against mischief and against theft and against damage and burglary. So one thing I can assure Indiana Borough residents of are that we are there constantly, and we'd like you to have confidence in the fact that we're working very hard to prevent as opposed to investigate an incident of. So it doesn't work in all scenarios, but that is the mission today. So there are very much enhanced business patrols and business checks being conducted daily.
Great, thank you. So I want to say, if I haven't already, I personally really appreciate the work that Indiana Borough's done, and as a programmer, I think that we have been focused on following CDC's advice, following the governor's advice in terms of wearing personal protective equipment and using really the best science. How have your officers, do you have PPE equipment, and how are you making use of that in your daily work?
So we do. We have gloves and we have N95 respirators that are available should we encounter situations. We have protective eyewear that's been made available to us, so I feel quite confident that we have that. CDC recommendations are changing, and as they change, we're going to continue to follow. So we have added the wearing of cloth face coverings to our uniform and our standard practice. Now, this is very new, and I don't know that anyone in the community has seen a police officer in that or not. I have a very strong sensitivity to the fact that I don't want a police officer wearing a mask to seem more intimidating. That is not the purpose. The purpose of a mask is for your protection and our protection. It's a community effort, and really we want to model the behavior that's being asked. There's no reason why the police department or any police department should be trending against the best recommendations of the CDC, because that's not where I exist today. I hold no special information that others don't. The CDC is telling us that a face mask or face covering is the best alternative in certain situations, which is close contact, grocery stores, hospitals. I may not wear a mask in the middle of the woods if I feel completely comfortable that I can avoid contact. But I will tell you this: if I'm out in public and I would risk coming in close contact with a neighbor, friend, or someone that even I didn't know, I would not want that person to be concerned of me, and I would want to protect myself and them in the best way that we could, which is wearing a mask, which is now the recommendation of the CDC. So this is something that the police department is going to do. It won't be in every scenario because we have different levels of when equipment is to be used, but certainly we have them on hand. The community has been great and very supportive, and we appreciate that. But this is our time to support the community. We're not asking for additional support. We're saying, how does the police department best serve Indiana Borough in this moment? Because although we're there to fight with everyone, this is not a moment where we're going to be more advantageous to anyone by interjecting ourselves into everyone's situation. We really want to support our first responders, the ambulance workers, the hospital, all the great people who have spoken before, all the business owners who are stressed and impacted. So I'm much more comfortable fitting in behind the scenes and not creating an issue where there doesn't need to be one. So I have a mask. Folks may see me in a mask out in public. I would not want anyone to be concerned about approaching me in a mask in public. I think it's responsible, and anything that we can do to be responsible is where we need to be today.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Is there anything else that you want to let folks know, let our audience know about some of the work you're doing, or in general in the coming weeks?
Well, we're going to continue to follow CDC recommendation, and so as they develop, we'll develop. As best information comes out, we'll follow best information. I really can't say anything more adequately or eloquently than anyone else on your panel today has said. So we're here to support everyone. Please don't be concerned if you see an officer from Indiana Borough wearing a mask. We don't have any information that anyone else doesn't have. We just want to be as responsible as everyone else is being asked to be. I have full faith and confidence in everyone in Indiana Borough, and I think this is a fantastic opportunity for all of us to come together in a different way that I believe will make everybody stronger in the long run.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Will you come back next week sometime and give us an update?
I will. I will absolutely do that.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming, Chief Shawl. I think we're going to get another